Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start a new scripture today. We have done it before also, but these kind of deep scriptures we got to do over and over again to really understand the deep meanings of these great writings. So let's do the prayers first. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parbrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Om Bhurbhuvah Swaha Tatsavitravare Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodaya Asto Ma Sadgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityurma Amritam Gamya ओम सहनावतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सवीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति 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 The name of the book which we are starting is Yog Darshan. And it's in the style of writing style is Sutra. So that's why it's commonly known as Yoga Sutras. And who wrote them? Rishi Patanjali. So that's why it's called Yoga Sutras of Rishi Patanjali. It is a collection of short, condensed phrases that really reveals the essence of yogic philosophy. So Sutra really means aphorism, very concise, very short. And what yoga means? See, often we say it yoga, but actually the real pronunciation is yoga. And we say sutras, but it's a sutra. Okay? So technically that is the correct, but sometimes when we talk about it, we just say sutras and the yoga. So yoga means union. And it refers to the uniting of the embodied soul with the universal consciousness, which we call Brahma also. So different names. This happens through the control of thought waves in the mind. And Rishi Patanjali says that right in the beginning, in the second verse of this scripture. And he also says that it can be brought about by persistent practice and dispassion. We learn that in Sutra number 12, in the first chapter. So this whole book has 4 chapters. 4 chapters. And altogether, how many sutras? 196. It's a very small book. If you look at the original form of it, it's only on 1 sheet of paper. 196 lines. And the teachings of the sutras were not created by Rishi Patanjali. He never said that I'm the author of it. But he was the first one to compile them in the written form. Before that, they were transmitted orally by the teacher and memorized by the serious students of yoga. That's why this time around, I would like you to memorize some of these sutras too. These sutras, they are a map. That's how I would like you to look at them. Map. A set of guideposts that navigate the intricacies of the mind and all its activities, leading from a restless, turbulent mind to the still and peaceful mind. When the mind is peaceful and still, it can be transcended automatically. If it's turbulent, restless, it cannot. Like all maps, the sutras need to be interpreted accurately for them to be effective. And this map has to be used by each student to gain the experience of union. So how do you get from the map to the experience? There's an important link in this process, and the link is the teacher or the guru. The teacher builds bridges that fill in the gaps of the skeletal map which has been left by Patanjali. And the materials for the bridges are the explanations, the demonstrations, and the commentaries. Because without this extra guidance, it is extremely difficult to understand the sutras. Because they are very concise, very condensed. A lot of words have been taken out so that students could memorize them. Like many traditional Indian philosophies, the sutras begin at the end. The most advanced and subtle aspects of yoga are presented first. That's why the very first chapter is called Samadhi Pad. You all know that. Samadhi is the goal. So Samadhi Pad, Pad means the portion, the chapter. So Samadhi Pad is the first chapter. But then in the second chapter, the Sadhana Pad, that means the practice, Patanjali moves to the middle, which are where he explains these practices which are known as Kriya Yoga, or the yogic practice which is known as Ashtanga Yoga also is mentioned in there, in the second chapter. So Samadhi Pad and Sadhana Pad. For those in whom the passion for worldly experiences has been quelled, the practices described in Samadhi Pad lead directly to Samadhi. So that means some people can sit and go into Samadhi right away. But majority of us got to do the practices. So Vibhuti Pad is the third chapter. That's how we prepare our mind also. So not just the body, but the mind also. And the last chapter, Kaivalya Pad, details the processes leading to final liberation. That is a result of asampargyat samadhi. So you can see that Yoga Sutras are not prescribed in the linear way that is familiar to most of us. It is almost like a spiraling logic of the sutras. That's why it requires several readings before the whole picture is formed in our mind. Yogic philosophy is not simply an intellectual exercise. Remember that. When the concepts and the practices introduced in the sutras are brought into daily life, only then we see the profound effect. Because right now, the ignorance of our true nature is the source of our suffering. And when the ignorance is removed, the right understanding, the suffering is reduced and finally eliminated. So the practices and the philosophy of yoga are designed to dispel this primal ignorance that rules the mind. In Sanskrit, we'll see that it's called avidya, the ignorance. What is mind? Mind is a collection of thoughts. So long as thoughts exist, the mind exists. And when the thoughts stop, the mind dissolves. And Patanjali described this state as asampargyat samadhi. This is a state of superconsciousness beyond all knowledge. because knowledge is in the mind and the mind is thought. So in asampargyat samadhi, we'll see these terms in the first chapter because there are several layers of samadhis. So asampargyat samadhi, the mind has stopped thinking. What remains is the pure consciousness, without any disturbances, without any activities, and definitely no impurity. This cannot be understood by the mind. Because if we try to understand it with our regular mind cannot understand it. Because it is a state beyond mind. And it is the goal of all the yogic practitioners. Or you can say that it is a goal of our life as a human being. The truths addressed in the Yoga Sutras transcend all duality, including all differences in race, culture, or gender. So that means this philosophy or this truth is for all of us. And yoga was not a new subject even at the time of Patanjali. In fact, the methods of yoga, union with the truth, God, or self, had been developed and practiced for thousands of years by rishis and munis of ancient India, prior to being written down by Patanjali. And this, we can see that it's implied in the very first sutra. When Rishi Patanjali says, Atyo Anushashanam. And he says, now in this present and auspicious moment, the discipline of yoga is presented. In Samadhi Pada, the very first chapter, Patanjali outlines the whole yoga system by saying in Sutra 2, Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha. He says yoga is the control of the thought waves in the mind. Two conditions of mind are implied by this sutra. The mind's outward expression, which is called pravritti, when mind goes outwardly, pravritti, and its inward expression, which is called nivritti. These two conditions define the basic value system of yoga, pravritti and nivritti. So in the terms of mental activity, vritti, the pravritti binds the mind to the afflictions of the worldly experiences. That means when mind goes outwardly, sure there will be afflictions. That's why it's called a klishta vritti, painful thought waves. Or it's also called vyuthan sanskar. See, these are the terms we'll see in the sutras. Vyuthan sanskar means outgoing mind. And from the nivritti, or the inward expression, mind gets liberated. That's why it's called akalishta vritti, non-painful thought waves. Or you can call it ekagra sanskars, or the one-pointed mind. So there are numerous methods of turning the mind inward and achieving samadhi are explained in the sutras. Because if that is the goal, then these teachers are telling us how to attain the goal also. Sure, we have to walk on the path, but they have created a beautiful path for us. Further, the various levels of sapragyat. So asampragyat and sampragyat, two words, you will see that. Sampragyat or the sabij samadhi are also described. So in the very first chapter, because a lot of times the first chapter with all these hard names, it becomes very difficult to understand. That's why we'll go through it very slowly. But I want you to write down these names and get familiarized with this terminology though. Okay, Sabij, Nirbij, Asampargyat, Sampargyat, and we'll definitely go through it in a detail. And what is in second chapter, Sadhanapad? Sadhanapad gives methods for those aspirants who could not attain this deep samadhi right away. So it's like a direct prescription of the samadhi path can be attained through sadhana path. So that's why this path starts by outlining the three practices of Kriya Yoga. Tap, which is austerity, Swadhyay, which is a study, and Ishwar Pranidhan, surrender to God. Together, it becomes a Kriya Yoga. And it culminates in a detailed description of 8 limbs of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. So we'll see that also in the second chapter. And this section also deepens the philosophical background of the yogic system by describing this creation. How does the creation came about? This great Rishi told us it's a conjunction of Purusha, which is the soul, and the Prakriti, which is the matter. So this is what creation is. So the soul and the matter, Purush and the Prakriti, they got wedded together and we see the creation. And what is the purpose of this? Purpose of this creation, Rishi Patanjali says, it's a bhog. That means purpose of experience, bhog. But then there's a higher purpose, which is called apvarg, liberation from the experience. It's almost like a child goes into the playground to play, to enjoy. But mother wants the child to come back home also. That is called apvarg, bhog and apvarg. So this is all we'll learn in the second chapter. And the third chapter, Vibhuti Pad, because when you are quietening your mind, when you are purifying your mind, you are doing this sadhana, some supernormal powers will come. Those are the result and the side effect of the practice of yoga. He talks about dharana, dhyana, samadhi, concentration, meditation, samadhi in this chapter. Then a technique of sanyam is mentioned in this chapter also, which is the purification and the perfection of these 3 limbs performed simultaneously on different objects. So the implication is that the unraveling of limited perceptions by piercing to the essence of the phenomenal reality unlocks the unlimited knowledge and fantastic abilities of the yogi. That is mentioned in this chapter. But at the same time, in Vibhuti Pad, there is a warning against the possible entrapment by these powers. Because some of these powers are, you'll be able to hear for, see for, you'll be able to read somebody's mind. You'll be able to create like God does. So when we get attached to these powers, we get entrapped. So that's why Rishi Patanjali warns us that goal is the union, not the powers. Don't even smile at the powers. Keep on moving forward. Then the last chapter, Kaivalya the liberation, addresses the concept of liberation. Kaivalya means perfect isolation and refers to the non-dual state that is the goal of yoga, union. Non-dual means there's no two, there's only one. That is a Kaivalya, Keval, only one. At this point, the spirit is isolated from worldly experiences and self is established in the self. We will see that in Yoga Sutras, Patanjali draws heavily from the Sankhya philosophy. Remember, there are Shat Darshan, 6 philosophies in India. And Sankhya philosophy, who's the author of it? Kapil Dev. So this terminology and the concepts describing the principle of the creation, the tattvas, they have been borrowed from the Sankhya philosophy. That's why Yoga and the Sankhya philosophy, they're called twin philosophies. But one difference is there, that pure Sankhya is non-theistic. Okay? But Patanjali introduces the concept of Ishwar, God with form, which is indicated by the sacred syllable Om. This opens the path of surrender to God, Ishwar Pranidhan. We'll see that in Sutra number 23 in the first chapter. Ishwar Pranidhan. One means of attaining to yoga union with the truth, God, or the self, Ishwar Pranidhan. If creation is the expansion of the life principle out from the source, constantly evolving with new forms, then yoga is the involution of consciousness back to its source. So that's why I was saying pravritti is going outward, nivritti is going back. So evolution and involution. So in this sense, the principles of yoga are found in all religions actually. All religions. And yoga can be practiced both within and without the concept of various religious beliefs, as it is an expression of the universal truth. The Yoga Sutras are a description of the process of yoga sadhana, spiritual practice, and a map of the states of consciousness that are attained through that practice. Basically, that's what it is. And as soon as a person starts the quest to determine the truth, to understand the nature of reality, or to find eternal peace, the aspirant has started on this path. The path of yoga is to join with that reality, the reality which is the truth, reality which brings the peace. That's why often when students ask me, how do we know we are progressing or not? Are you more peaceful or not? Doesn't matter what the situations are. Inwardly, are you peaceful or not? If you are more and more peaceful, you are progressing. The study of the Yoga Sutras in conjunction with the practice of Yoga Sadhana is an effective and vital path for all of us. So going back to the first chapter, summary of Samadhipada starts with what is yoga. Yoga is Chitvritti Nirodha. Yoga is the union that occurs with the discovery of true self and the knowledge of our true nature. Yoga is the union with that which is truth for the whole universe. And that union gives peace. Yoga is a way to understand our place within creation and guides us to act without harming others. or causing pain to ourselves also. Yoga is a spiritual path, and the Yoga Sutras are map and guide. That's how we are going to study this time around. The way to progress on this path is to remove the obstacles, because on any path there are obstacles. Because obstacles on this path, they keep the mind in a state of distraction. Those distractions, they block our ever-present eternal reality. To attain this union, we don't need anything from outside. Because this is our real nature. Essentially, this is what we are. The reality, the truth is already here now. It is our very self. And in yoga, this state of eternal bliss and union is viewed as our natural state. Whenever we are disturbed, that is unnatural. Whenever we are impure, that is very unnatural. Whenever we feel alone, that's very unnatural. So from the perspective of yoga, it is our commonly experienced state of separation and pain, which we assume to be natural, that is unnatural. Yogic philosophy sees that our normal state of confused mind and multi-mindedness is used to fulfill our desires. And when we have the desires, we justify, we defend our self-interest. We look at it properly. Because in this worldly minded state, the individual ego, with all its attachments, becomes very important to us. But that's where the suffering is coming from too. The suffering mind cannot be controlled. So the Yoga Sutras explore both the state of inwardly directed nivritti mind and definitely outwardly directed pravritti mind also. Because right now our mind is a pravritti mind, so we got to learn how to control that mind and send it to the proper direction. Because these inward and outward flows, they happen all the time. So remember, the key note sutra is Sutra 2. Yoga Chitvritti Nirodha. Yoga is the control of thought waves in the mind. So general states of mind are implied by Sutra 2, the controlled state of mind and the uncontrolled state of mind. And that's why Nirodha is a operative factor in the development of higher consciousness. So Nirodha is both a process, because a lot of time it's very hard to understand what Nirodha is. So Nirodha is both a process by which subtler levels of reality are revealed and a state of pure, unconditioned awareness beyond the comprehension of the finite mind. That's Nirodha. And the obstacle to discovering our own true nature is the vrittis, the thinking principle in the mind. Thinking. So that's why it's very important to understand what mind is. In yogic philosophy, the mind has several aspects. Sure, we are using the word chit over here. That's also a mind. That's a deeper part of our mind. So it's not only the upper layer of the mind, but the deeper part of the mind needs to be controlled. And mind is a part of the Prakriti. That is another thing we got to always remember. Prakriti, the matter. Mind is not conscious by itself. Prakriti is inert by itself. Instead, it is reflection of the consciousness in the mind that lights the mind. And in Prakriti, everything has three qualities: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva is the quality of purity. Rajas is the quality of activity. And Tamas is the quality of inertia. So mind can have these qualities. So these qualities which manifest themselves at every level of the creation are opposed to each other. But still they are trying to achieve a balance. So that's why the Mahat, the universal intellect, has three guns also. So the Chit has three guns. Everything in the Prakriti has these three guns. Let's talk a little bit about the Vritti also. Because if the definition of yoga says yoga Chit Vritti Nirodha, Vritti means to revolve. Revolve, that's a Vritti. So vrittis are the thought waves that revolve in the mind. So in the mind, there are thoughts. When revolve, they are called vrittis. And thought waves include our emotions, our memories, our intuitions, imagination, or even subliminal thoughts, or even cognitive thoughts. Vritti is sometimes translated as mental modifications. But remember, it's all of those. The revolving aspect of thought waves implies an imprinting process. Because that's how the sanskars are created. They get imprinted. And those sanskars, they get stored in the chit. And we are supposed to wash those away. So this impression remains dormant until activated by a favorable environment, at which time it becomes active and a new thought wave arises. So again, the new vritti conditioned by the past impression creates another impression. So it's almost like a feedback loop in our mind. That's why we think that we can never control our mind. Because the new information going, the old is already there, just keeps on revolving constantly. And Nirodha. Nirodha. Because we are supposed to do the yoga chit vritti nirodha. These vrittis, we got to nirodha them, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with the martial arts. There is a blocking pose in a martial arts. That's what nirodha is. Blocking. Because blocking is different than repressing. Because repressing is related to aversion. And aversion is one of the obstacles. So nirodha does not mean repression. It means blocking. Blocking is the selectivity we use in concentration. Remember that. Normally, our mind receives input from senses and from memory at a rapid rate. Perhaps thousands of impressions every second. And we choose which impressions to allow into one awareness. So this process of selective awareness, which gives us the ability to focus our concentration, is related to the idea of Nirodha. Remember that. So in focusing on one thought, we automatically exclude others. Think about Om only, block others. Think about the godly light, block other thoughts. So by what means are thought waves controlled or nirodha? The word used for control is the operative means by which yoga is established. We'll see that in Sutra number 12 in the first chapter, Abhyas Vairagya Bhyam Tanirodha. So Nirodha has two parts, Abhyas and Vairagya. So Nirodha we got to do, Nirodha of the vrittis, but how do we do the Nirodha? By Abhyas and Vairagya. It's all given over there. So by regular practice and dispassion, the painful and non-painful thought waves are controlled. So practice is that effort required to gain sthiti. Sthiti means stability in one pointed concentration. And dispassion is that which frees us from the distracted mind. So abhyas and vairagya, both. So nirodh is related to concentration. For the mind to be concentrated is necessary to focus on one object and block all the impulses that would distract the mind. That's why the Ishta Devata is important. You are just channeling your mind towards the Ishta Devata and block all others thoughts. That's nirodha. So the process of yoga is a process of deconditioning the mind, you can call. The mind which wants to go into the pravritti state, you are deconditioning it. And this mind needs the training. We got to teach our mind to withdraw from the senses and to concentrate. And that does require effort. The conditions of a chit could be mood. Mood means dull, preoccupied. Sometimes it could be that. It could be kshipt, that is restless. It could be vikshipt, distracted. It could be ekagra, one-pointed, or it could be niruddha, restrained. So as a yoga abhyasi, we got to move towards, we don't want to have a dull and a preoccupied mind with this world. We don't want a kshipt mind, which is a restless mind. We don't even want a distracted mind. We want a ekagra mind. When I tell my mind to focus on this, the mind should focus, whether it's a worldly endeavor or whether it's a spiritual endeavor. My mind should listen to me. That's called the ekagra mind. But ultimately, nirodha mind. That is the highest. So these are called the conditions of our mind. As the mind as a whole is categorized, it could be dull, restless, distracted, one-pointed, or restrained. So we are the owner of this mind. We should see what is the condition of our mind. When the mind is dominated by the quality of tamas, it is a mood mind, dull mind. When it's a depressed feeling, it could be a restless mind. There's a lot of rajsikta in there. But when it moves towards the satvikta, only then it becomes a ekagra mind. Satvik, pure mind, is a ekagra mind. And then ultimately, that the niruddha mind is the one who's in the state of samadhi. The word samadhi comes from the root word sam. Sam means perfect, complete. So for that, we need to do the refinement. We need to the practice. So that's why the practice is so important on this path. It's not just a one day of practice. Practice until we reach there. So there has to be a systematic practice, regular practice, a deep practice, and a love for practice also. So throughout the Yoga Sutras, Rishi Patanjali emphasizes that we must follow the system. We must fulfill the prerequisites. We must undergo some preparatory practices also. This concentration will lead to meditation. Meditation will lead to samadhi. This is like a very progressive path. He's showing it to us, and very doable also. The practices that help us will make our body healthy, will make our mind clear, and eventually we will know who we are. These are the practices. These sutras, they tell us clearly how our body can best serve our mind. How both our mind and body can serve the purpose of who we are, which is soul. It's a monumental work which Patanjali has done for us. In just only 196 lines, he has given us the total map of our life. What we are, what the obstacles can be, what the practices are, and where will we reach. So from Samadhi path to Sadhana path to the Vibhuti path, and he told us the pitfalls also, and ultimately the Kaivalya path. Remember, a confused mind is not fit to follow any path. That's why this clarification is there in these sutras. If the mind is trained, disciplined, purified, one-pointed, we will be successful in all of our endeavors. On the other hand, if the mind is corrupt, we are doomed. He's very clear about it, and we can see that. So with a clear and disciplined mind, we can reach the God of our choice, he says, and even beyond. That's what he says in one of those sutras. That God of your choice, your Ish Devata, Samparyoga. That means you will have a union with that God. But with a confused, undisciplined mind, we create a hell wherever we go. This is the difference. So we'll just slowly go through these sutras. Another thing, let me tell you, because I said 196 verses. The first chapter, the Samadhipad, has 51 verses, 51 sutras. The second chapter has 55. Third chapter, Vibhutipad, has 56. And the last chapter, Kaivalyapad, has 34. So if you add all these numbers, total is 196 lines only. So we'll see who will remember or memorize most of these sutras. Even if you memorize just 5 of them, that's okay too. Memorization is very important. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are concise aphorisms, because if somebody asks you today, what are you studying? Author is the Patanjali. Writing style is the sutras, which are called aphorisms, but they are full of meaning. The meaning in each sutra is so much. That's why the sutras, they deserve or even require a repeated study and can be the object of deep reflection. Each sutra serves as a point of entry into the whole body of knowledge known as the yogic philosophy, as each one reflects an aspect of the whole. There are, of course, some keynote sutras that are pivotal to understanding the essence of yogic philosophy and practice. In Samadhipad, the most important sutras, where we'll spend a lot of time, will be Sutra number 2, 3, 4, 12, 17, 18, 20, 23, 28, 33, 41, 43, 50, and 51. You'll see that maybe in some of the classes we'll spend only in the whole hour just one sutra. 2, 3, 4, if you're writing them down. 12, 17, 18, 20, 23, 28, 33, 41, 43, 50, and 51. Okay. And any of these sutras can be used as the object of deep meditation. You will see that. And Yoga Sutras can also be read as a flow or progression which create another type of understanding through the linking of the different concepts. And we'll see that subject of samadhi is introduced in Sutra 17 and 18 in the first chapter. Then again it returns to 41, 44, 51. So you will see that some of these things, that's why it's very important to take notes. I don't want you to get lost or get confused when we go through the sutras. But Rishi Patanjali is showing us a very crystalline structure of a gem. Because he's showing us the different facets of that gem by going through the sutras. So this is an approach very appropriate for the Yoga Sutras as a subject matter. But remember, ultimately, practice, only then there is a possibility of real peace. Real peace comes from the experience of non-duality. Real peace. When there's a oneness in our relationships also, when there's a oneness, there's a peace. When we use the word us and the we feel peaceful. When we say you and mine, there's always a conflict. So this is what yoga teaches us. And this is the experience of asampargyat samadhi eventually. Ever-present beacon of hope in the world of confusion and suffering. Yoga brings. We'll stop it here and go through some question answers also, but let me do the ending prayer also. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much for coming.